So I am back with Maggie Sims, who just read a sample of Charlotte's Control. And when you were setting up the book, there were two things that stood out to me. One was that Charlotte is a widow and that she had a love match. And we hear that in the scene as well. I feel like usually in historical romance, when there are past relationships, it's a negative one or like a neutral, we agreed not to touch each other sort
Right.
of one. So, what led you to giving Charlotte a love match?
I was tired of the other ones. I felt like this could be realistic. Ultimately, I probably thought through it after, like as I was writing further, more than in the beginning. I knew I wanted it from the beginning, but like later on, there's a scene where it gives him a little bit of power as well. Like he starts on in a later scene, he starts undressing her and he rubs her back from where the stays had pressed her chemise into her. And that's something Charles had done, and she starts crying. And so he holds her and then he leaves. And she's like, wait, what? And he's like, when I'm, I'll come back when I'm the only man in your bed. But this is what you needed from me now. This is the service you needed from me now, kind of thing. And so it balanced things out nicely in the end. But I just really I'm a romance fan. So I wanted her to have had a romance and think, well, how do I find this again?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, and I think about this a lot too, and how we as modern readers are very accustomed to having relationships, multiple relationships in our lives. Like, I
Right.
think the average American woman does have multiple relationships. And so to help us process that, it's nice to see a heroine like Charlotte who has loved before and can love again.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I didn't actually think of it that way, but thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned control as a dynamic, and I also saw that in describing your series for this book is in, which is called Control, that the kind of series intention is to explore dynamics of control that might appear unequal but lead to supportive relationships. I
Mhm.
really liked seeing that intention for the series. I feel like a lot of times, we're like, it's a series that's following four friends from college or whatever, which is great. But yeah, so can you talk a little bit more about what that means to you and why you wanted to do a whole series about it?
So the reason I got into writing in this niche of Regency romance, but super spicy, was because the control was almost always in the man's hand in the Regency.
Mm.
And each of my heroines find their own power in that. In the first series, they were taught that at the school kind of thing, or some of them were. And, but they kind of have to do it on the sly around society, right? And even Charlotte does. I want to make this series about each person finding the balance of control that they're comfortable with, despite that time period, maybe, right? And so I liked bucking the norm. I also I like age gap romances to read, and I like them both ways, and not everybody does. And so I wanted that to be part of that dynamic.
Mhm.
The next book in the series is actually about self control and learning that. So I really just kind of want to look at all angles and how that was handled in that period.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, like you said, it's spicy. And we were seeing in this scene, a little bit of, I think BDSM is where it's going with that. I don't want to mislabel it if I'm wrong, but
Like bondage. I mean, just
okay.
no,
Yeah. Light
but
bondage. So there's like, that is often associated with sexual control, but I also love that you're using that to kind of broaden the conversation and look at control in terms of personal dynamics and
yes.
independence.
Yeah, the age part, there is money part. She's quite wealthy, and his father has just let the earldom go. Yeah, so there's a few layers in there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so what do you think makes an age gap so yummy for you?
Probably the power dynamic, which is a form of control, right? But I think it's also the fact that it demonstrates the universality of love, right? In other episodes of your podcast, you've asked, do you believe in soulmates? And I don't per se. I think, once upon a time, the world was quite small and you found your match, within a
Mhm.
certain geographical area. You've lived around the world. I've lived around the country, and I found my person at one of those stops. But are there other people out for me? I don't know. I know there's other people out for him, but I'm a little harder to get along with. So, but anyway, I digress. So I think like looking outside your age range as well as a geographical range is a realistic thing
Mhm.
and something that should not be ignored. And so I like that part of it too.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's also interesting in this book specifically, like not only are they 10 years apart, but he's in this specific life phase of being a 20-year-old man who's like still in college or the
Right.
equivalent thereof.
Mhm.
And she's this independent widow who has a lot more life experience. Like that's a big 10 years.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
that's
it
really
is.
interesting.
Yeah. And he hasn't yet reached his majority. Like even if his father died the next day, he would have to have his cousin help him, kind of be the, I forget what it's called, steward or whatever of
Yeah.
the estate. So yeah.